terminal was unusually quiet for a Friday night. Muted footsteps, echoing against marble floors, announcements dissolving into soft static. Georgia adjusted the strap of her leather bag, exhausted, but content, the faint taste of Copenhagen's winter air still on her tongue. She'd taken the earlier flight home, a decision so spontaneous, even she couldn't explain it. Her official return was scheduled for tomorrow morning, but something, an unspoken pressure in her chest, a sound beneath awareness, had whispered that she needed to come home tonight. Her phone buzzed. No messages from Andrew. Not unusual. When he worked late, he disappeared into blueprints and deadlines unreachable even to her. But as she wheeled her suitcase through the arrival gate, a familiar figure caught her eye near the far end of the terminal. Tall, perfect posture, a bouquet of white lilies in his hands. Andrew. Georgia froze mid-step. For a brief, disbelieving moment, she smiled. Maybe he'd somehow known she'd come home early. Perhaps this was one of those cinematic gestures, the husband waiting to surprise his wife. She almost waved. Then a woman emerged from the crowd. Blonde hair, expensive coat, quick, confident stride. Before Georgia could process what she was seeing, the woman ran straight into Andrew's arms. The bouquet tilted dangerously, petals brushing her hair as she laughed, a soft, private laugh that belonged to people who'd already memorized each other's secrets. Andrew caught her easily, steadying her by the waist. His smile was open, unguarded, tender, the kind of smile he hadn't given Georgia in years. Time fractured into silence. The sound of luggage wheels and distant voices faded into nothing. Georgia's first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe her jet-lagged mind was filling in details it wanted to see. But when he turned slightly, she saw the familiar scar on his jaw, the cufflinks she'd given him for their anniversary. The same tailored overcoat he always wore when he wanted to impress someone. He said something to the woman, words Georgia couldn't hear, but she saw his lips form a shape she knew by heart. "You're perfect." The woman laughed again and whispered something near his ear. Andrew's hand slid to the small of her back as they walked toward the exit, still close enough that their steps synchronized. Georgia didn't move. Couldn't. Her pulse thudded in her ears like distant thunder. A part of her, the disciplined analytical architect who solved problems for a living, began cataloging details automatically. White lilies, symbol of purity renewal, a gift he used to bring her after long business trips. Terminal B, Gate 14, late flight arrivals from Paris and Milan. No hesitation when the woman ran to him. No confusion on his face. He was expecting her. The realization settled like wet cement in her chest, heavy, unyielding. She followed at a distance, careful to keep behind a group of travelers. Andrew and the woman stopped near the doors, leading to the private car pickup zone. A black town car idled at the curb. The driver stepped forward, taking their luggage while Andrew opened the door for her with practiced grace. The woman turned to him, resting her hand briefly on his cheek. "You don't have to pretend anymore," she said. Georgia couldn't hear the words, but she read them perfectly on her lips. Years of reading lips during architectural presentations had trained her too well. Then the woman smiled, a knowing, dangerous smile. "Now I'll show you the real face of a powerful woman." She slid into the car. Andrew followed. The door closed, and just like that, they were gone. Georgia stood rooted to the polished floor, surrounded by strangers who didn't see that the axis of her world had shifted. For several long seconds, she stared at the glass doors, half expecting him to come running back, laughing, explaining. But the car had already merged into the flow of headlights outside, swallowed by the city's pulse. She exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone, unlocking it out of pure reflex. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. Her own reflection stared back at her in the dark glass, composed, professional. the face of a woman who'd spent years building beauty from ruins. But tonight that face looked like a stranger's. She turned toward the exit, the suitcase wheels whispering behind her. The taxi stand outside smelled of rain and exhaust. When the driver asked where she was headed, Georgia hesitated. The estate her home suddenly felt like a foreign place. Yet that was where she needed to go. She had to see it with her own eyes. Simone Estate, she said quietly. The ride took an hour. The city lights gave way to winding country roads, lined with autumn trees, their branches bare against the night sky. Georgia stared out the window, memories flickering with each passing landmark. The antique shop, where she'd chosen their dining table, the bakery that always smelled of cinnamon, the stone bridge she'd restored herself. When the car finally stopped before the estate gates, she saw something she didn't expect, the library lights blazing. Andrew never used that room. It had belonged to his father, a space filled with books and unspoken disappointment. He said it felt haunted by expectations he could never meet. Yet tonight, the windows glowed as if the house were alive again. Georgia paid the driver and stepped into the cool air. The fountain she'd restored murmured nearby, the scent of wet stone mixed with jasmine from the garden she'd planted years ago. Everything looked perfect, too perfect, like a photograph staged to hide decay beneath the surface. She hesitated by the garden archway, running her fingers along the restored masonry. She remembered every brick she'd set, every late night spent perfecting the curvature. It had been her favorite part of the project, the tangible proof that creation could be both fragile and immortal. Now it felt like an artifact from another life. As she walked toward the house, her heels brushed against fallen leaves, their rustle sharp in the midnight air. She stopped near the library window. The curtains were half drawn, just enough to see inside. 3 figures. Andrew sat in his father's old chair. Lillian, his mother, stood nearby, elegant as ever, her posture precise. And a woman George's breath caught. It was the same woman from the airport. The 3 of them leaned over a table covered with papers and blueprints. Georgia recognized them instantly. The sustainable plaster schematics. Her breakthrough. Her blood went cold. The woman was explaining something, gesturing with confident hands, her tone animated. Andrew nodded, taking notes, occasionally smiling. Lillian looked pleased, smiling in that restrained, approving way that used to make Georgia feel like a student seeking validation. Georgia leaned closer, pressing one palm against the cold glass. The voices were faint, carried by the night breeze through the slightly open window. If we patent the technique under the company's research division, the woman was saying, it'll secure the Simone legacy for the next generation. Legacy. The word cut through Georgia like a blade. Andrew's voice followed, calm, persuasive, familiar. Brilliant. Exactly what we need. Preservation and innovation combined. You've done exceptional work, Bethany. Bethany. The name meant nothing and everything at once. Lillian's tone was smooth and practiced. This is the kind of institutional thinking we've needed. Not ego. Not individual credit. Just a contribution to the family heritage. Andrew smiled. Some people get too attached to their names on the plaque. Laughter. 3 voices blending in quiet harmony. Georgia stepped back from the window, her pulse hammering. In the reflection, her own eyes looked unrecognizable, sharp, cold, deliberate. Somewhere inside, something cracked, not loudly, but with the slow, specific sound of a foundation beginning to fail. She turned from the glowing house and whispered to the night, "Now, let's see how strong your legacy really is." And for the first time in her life, Georgia realized she wasn't walking away from home. She was walking toward the truth. The clock on the carriage house wall glowed past midnight when Georgia unlocked the door. She didn't turn on the lights. The darkness felt safer, like armor. Her heels clicked softly across the reclaimed oak floors she'd chosen herself. each sound a reminder of a life she designed with precision, unaware that she was constructing her own trap. The house smelled faintly of cedar and paper, the scent of her drafts and blueprints. It was supposed to smell like home. Now it smelled like evidence. Her eyes drifted to the far wall, where her framed sketches hung drawings of arches, domes, and delicate restorations that had earned her quiet admiration in architecture circles. She used to believe those drawings were the map of her ambition. Tonight, they looked like a record of everything someone else had stolen. She dropped her bag and sat at her desk. Her fingers hovered over her phone. Call him. Demand an explanation. Ask who Bethany was. But no. The woman at the airport hadn't looked like a secret lover. She'd looked like a successor. Georgia's hand trembled as she opened her laptop. The login screen glowed in the dark room. She typed in her password, the same one Andrew insisted they share for convenience. How generous that had seemed at the time. The desktop loaded. Files everywhere, company reports, blueprints, design drafts. But something new caught her eye, a folder labeled Institutional Transition. Her breath quickened. She double-clicked. Inside were subfolders named Training Material Patents, Pending, and Internal Presentation. Bethany Crane. Her heart lurched. She clicked the last one. The slideshow opened her own drawings, scanned and labeled Simone Method Sustainable Plaster Innovation. Every page carried her handwriting, every formula, every experiment. Her work stripped of her name was stamped instead with the company logo. Georgia's throat burned. A video attachment blinked at the bottom of the screen. She clicked play. Andrew's voice filled the silence. Bethany, your articulation of the sustainability concept is flawless. If we push this as a Simone proprietary method, it will redefine our brand globally. Lillian's voice followed calm and cold. Good. Let's secure the patent before Georgia's next award submission. She'll never challenge it if we make it appear to be institutional property. A pause. Then Andrew again, soft, almost apologetic. She's too idealistic. She thinks marriage protects her. That's why she'll never see it coming. Georgia's breath caught. Her stomach twisted. She hit pause before her own heartbeat drowned out the sound. Her reflection stared back from the black screen. Calm. Controlled. Terrifyingly calm. She whispered into the darkness. You underestimated the wrong woman. Her fingers moved quickly, copying, compressing, and transferring the files to an external drive. She'd deal with the rest later. For now, she needed space to think. Outside, the night pressed heavily. The estate loomed across the gardens like a cathedral of deceit. Each lighted window a confession she hadn't heard yet. Then a sound. A soft creak near the side door. Georgia froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not the hurried steps of a servant or delivery. Someone was moving carefully, quietly inside the main house. She killed her laptop screen and reached for the small lamp on the table. The metal felt cold beneath her fingertips. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice, smooth and feminine, drifted from beyond the garden path. Still awake, Bethany. Georgia's pulse pounded. She remained silent. I know you're there. Bethany continued, her tone composed, almost amused. The library window isn't as soundproof as Andrew thinks it is. Georgia stepped into the doorway, moonlight spilling over her face. You seem comfortable walking on someone else's property at night. Bethany smiled faintly. Comfort comes with purpose. I came to deliver a message. From Andrew. From Lillian. Georgia crossed her arms. Let me guess something about discretion. Family unity. The importance of legacy. Bethany tilted her head. Close. She said, tell Georgia she's brilliant, That's why we had to neutralize her." The words hit like a slap. Bethany's expression softened, not sympathetic, but curious. "You're exceptional, Georgia. But you make the same mistake all geniuses make. You think truth alone protects you. It doesn't. Power does. And power belongs to those who act first." Georgia's jaw tightened. "Then consider this your warning. I'm done being polite." Bethany's eyes glimmered. "Good. Because polite women rarely survive in the world we build." She turned, walking away through the garden arch. Georgia wanted to call after her, demand why she was helping them, why she looked almost sorry. But she stayed silent, watching, until Bethany vanished into the night. When Georgia finally returned inside, her hands shook with a mix of fury and revelation. She replayed the last few minutes in her mind. Bethany had come deliberately not to threaten, but to test her, to see how far she'd go. She opened her phone again, one unread message. "Andrew, miss you. Can't wait to see what you've accomplished." Her laugh came out broken, almost hysterical. He already knew exactly what she'd accomplished. He'd stolen it. For a moment, anger blurred everything. Then slowly, something else took shape beneath it: clarity. If they thought she would crumble, they'd miscalculated. She was an architect. She understood structure. She knew that if you wanted to bring a building down, you didn't strike the facade, you targeted the foundation. And Andrew Simone's entire foundation rested on her. She pulled out her old project files, contracts, permits, designs from her early restoration days. Hidden between them was a contact card. Iris Smith, attorney at law. They'd met in graduate school, two women trying to carve out a place for themselves in male-dominated fields. Iris was the kind of friend who could destroy you in court if you lied, but protect you like a fortress if you told her the truth. Georgia dialed. Georgia Iris's voice came sleepy but alert. "I need legal advice," Georgia said. "Confidential. Urgent." There was a pause. "Are you in danger?" "Not yet. But my work is." "Then you're in danger," Iris replied. "Send me everything you have. I don't know how deep it goes. Assume it goes deeper than you think," Iris said. "And don't let them know you've seen anything." Georgia's fingers tightened around the phone. "I can't play innocent." "Yes, you can," Iris said. "You're an architect. You build illusions for a living. Just create one more." When the call ended, Georgia stood by the window, watching the estate from across the garden. The lights in the library were still on. She could make out silhouettes. Andrew, his mother, their heads bent close, plotting her erasure with the same precision she used to design cathedrals. But beneath the rising storm inside her, there was something unexpected, a pulse of painful, unwanted love. She still loved him. That was the worst part. The memory of the man who once kissed her, who whispered that she was his miracle, lingered like dust on the edge of a broken frame. But now she understood love without respect was just another architecture built on stolen ground. As dawn began to lighten the sky, Georgia slipped the external drive into a hidden compartment in her drafting table. The morning light caught her reflection. Tired eyes, steady hands, the beginning of something sharper than grief. She whispered to herself, "They built their empire on my work. Let's see how it holds when I start pulling bricks." Outside, the first birds stirred in the trees. Inside Georgia began the quiet, deliberate work of revenge. Morning broke with the color of cold steel. Georgia hadn't slept. Her eyes burned from hours spent sifting through files, legal contracts, and encrypted archives. She'd memorized every line of betrayal she found, but she knew instinctively that what she'd seen so far was only the surface. The absolute rot was buried deeper in the foundation of the empire that bore her husband's name. She opened her curtains and looked across the lawn. The main house glimmered under early sunlight, quiet and peaceful, as if nothing sinister had ever happened there. But behind those walls, lies were stacked like bricks, each one supporting the illusion of a perfect marriage. Her phone buzzed. A message from Iris. Check the inheritance trust. Start with the property deed. Everything you're seeing points to premeditation. Premeditation. The word turned her stomach. Georgia had spent years believing she was a partner, a co-architect of their life. But what if she'd been the blueprint, all along the raw material, Andrew and his mother used to construct their dynasty? She opened the old filing cabinet in her study and pulled out a folder marked Marriage Settlement. It was supposed to be symbolic, a merging of lives, assets, and dreams. She remembered signing it with a smile, trusting the man who'd kissed her hand and promised forever. Now, with trembling fingers, she began to read. Hidden in the fine print beneath layers of legal language was a clause she had never noticed. All intellectual property patents and innovations created during the tenure of the marriage shall be considered joint marital assets under the Simone Estate Trust. Her pulse quickened. It didn't say joint ownership. It said Simone Estate Trust, meaning control rested not with her or even Andrew, but with Lillian Simone, the family matriarch and trustee. A quiet knock startled her. She froze. The door opened slightly. A man in a dark suit stepped inside the estate's longtime accountant, Mr. Carrington. His expression was polite, but unreadable. "Mrs. Simone," he said. "Apologies for the intrusion. Lillian asked me to deliver the updated trust documentation for your review." Her voice stayed calm, but her pulse thudded hard. "I wasn't aware there were updates." "Routine adjustments," Carrington said. "Inheritance law changes, you know. Best to stay compliant." He placed the thick envelope on her desk. His tone was professional, but his eyes flickered. Hesitation, maybe guilt. He lingered for half a second too long, then turned to leave. "Mr. Carrington," Georgia said quietly, "do you ever feel like you're helping the wrong people?" He paused. "In my profession, Mrs. Simone, right and wrong are luxuries. Numbers don't have a conscience." When he was gone, Georgia tore open the envelope. Inside was a new legal draft, a trust modification transferring ownership of the Simone estate and all subsidiary projects to Simone heirs and successors. Her name was nowhere. It was dated 2 weeks ago, signed by Andrew, and notarized by Lillian. The air left her lungs. They hadn't just stolen her work, they were erasing her existence. Her phone buzzed again. "Iris, you need to understand what this means. That clause wasn't written to protect the family. It was written to absorb you. You're the innovation pipeline. They marry brilliance, consume it, and move on." Georgia read the message twice. Her hands shook, but her voice when she called Iris was steady. "Tell me exactly what I'm dealing with." Iris didn't hesitate. The Simone Trust operates like a corporate shell. Every marriage, every business partnership, every property acquisition is part of a legacy mechanism. Once the creative partner contributes intellectual property, it's transferred to the estate. The originator, meaning you can't claim independent ownership. Georgia swallowed hard. "So legally my work belongs to them." "Not entirely," Iris said. "If you can prove coercion or fraud, if you can show they married you under pretenses, you can dismantle the trust. But it won't be easy. Lillian's attorneys are notorious. They don't just fight cases, they bury people in paperwork." Georgia's eyes darkened. "Then I'll make sure they choke on mine." Later that afternoon, Georgia drove into the city. She needed answers, and not the kind written on paper. She parked outside the Simone Group headquarters, glass towers gleaming like blades against the skyline. She'd helped design the lobby 5 years ago, back when her name still carried weight. The marble floors reflected her heels as she crossed to the reception desk. The young receptionist looked up, startled. "Mrs. Simone, I, didn't know you were scheduled today." Georgia smiled gently. "Neither did my husband." She walked past before the woman could respond. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft hiss. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls, calm, elegant, unreadable. But beneath the composure, her mind raced. She wasn't just confronting Andrew, she was hunting for the truth buried beneath his charm. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, she heard his voice immediately. Confident, persuasive, perfectly modulated. He was in the middle of a presentation. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, she saw him surrounded by investors. Lillian sat at the head of the table, every inch the queen she believed herself to be. Bethany stood near the screen, presenting a slide labeled Sustainability Through Legacy. Georgia's own architectural drawings filled the display. Without knocking, she opened the door. Conversation stopped. The room froze. Andrew's eyes widened, then narrowed. "Georgia," he said smoothly, "you're back earlier than expected. I have a habit of surprising people lately." Lillian's voice was honey-laced with venom. "My dear, this is a confidential meeting." Georgia walked to the center of the room, ignoring her. Funny thing about confidentiality, it usually hides something worth stealing. Bethany shifted uncomfortably, but didn't speak. Andrew forced a chuckle. "Let's not dramatize, darling. You know how passionate you get about intellectual credit. This is collaboration. Collaboration." Georgia's voice was low-measured. "Then why is my name missing from every patent filing?" A ripple went through the room. The investors exchanged uneasy glances. Andrew's mask cracked for half a second before he recovered. "You're misunderstanding love. It's all part of the trust structure. Legal technicalities. Technicalities that conveniently make your family owners of everything I've created." Lillian leaned forward, her smile sharp. "Georgia, you must understand the Simone legacy is bigger than any one individual. You should be proud to be part of it." Georgia turned toward her slowly. "I am proud, Lillian. Not just theft disguised as a legacy." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Andrew rose, his tone soft but lethal. "This isn't the place for this conversation. Let's talk privately." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man she'd once adored, now a stranger wearing familiarity like armor. "You had every chance to talk privately, Andrew. You chose deceit instead." She turned toward the investors. "Gentlemen, I suggest that you reconsider any partnerships involving intellectual property that is under dispute. There are legal complications you're not aware of yet, but you will be." Then she walked out, leaving the room in stunned silence. That night, as she sat in her car overlooking the city, her phone lit up again, a message from Bethany. "You were magnificent. But be careful. Lillian doesn't lose gracefully. And Andrew's charm. It turns violent when cornered." Georgia stared at the message for a long time, her pulse steadying. Bethany wasn't just a pawn. She was a double player balancing loyalty and survival. Georgia typed back, "Thank you for the warning, but I'm not the one who's cornered anymore." As she pressed send, the lights of the Simone building shimmered in the distance, cold, beautiful, fragile. She smiled faintly. "Let's see how your empire handles a few cracks." The war had begun. The city hummed beneath a low ceiling of fog, its skyline a mosaic of light and distance. Georgia parked 2 blocks away from the law office, her pulse steady but sharp. Tonight wasn't about anger. It was about strategy. She'd already learned that emotion was a weapon her enemies used against her. Logic, precision, control. Those were hers. The elevator doors opened to reveal Iris standing in the corridor, arms crossed, eyes calculating. The two women didn't hug. They didn't need to. Years of trust filled the space between them more than any greeting could. "Welcome back to the battlefield," Iris said, closing the office door behind them. "I never left Georgia," replied. The office was dimly lit, files stacked like fortifications on every surface. Iris gestured toward the large table covered in documents. "I've been digging through the Simone archives since your call. You were right. There's a pattern. Every major innovation tied to that family for the past 2 decades can be traced back to someone who mysteriously vanished after collaborating." George's breath caught. "You mean this isn't new? Not even close?" Iris opened a folder and spread out a set of names. Designers, engineers, architects, inventors. Each one entered into a partnership, marriage, or consulting deal. Each signed the same trust clause. Within a year, gone. Some retired early, others sold their shares for pennies. A few disappeared. Georgia stared at the pattern. How did no one notice? "They noticed," Iris said grimly. "They were paid not to care." Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. Then Georgia asked the question she already feared the answer to. "How do I bring them down?" Iris gave a small, knowing smile. "By playing their game better than they do." Over the next few days, Iris assembled a small team of specialists, people who owed her favors or shared her appetite for justice. Mark, a former cybersecurity expert turned whistleblower, was the first to join. Then Elena, a forensic accountant whose calm demeanor hid a ruthless precision. Together they became Georgia's hidden allies, ghosts working in the shadows of the Simone Empire. In Iris's words, "You can't destroy a fortress by attacking its walls. You have to turn the guards." Georgia's role was to move among her enemies without raising suspicion. To smile when Andrew called, to nod when Lillian offered false comfort, to act like the loyal wife returning to everyday life. The performance was exhausting, but it worked. Andrew softened, mistaking her composure for surrender. Lillian, too, began lowering her guard, inviting Georgia back to family dinners and meetings to maintain appearances. Bethany, however, was harder to read. One evening, after a long day of pretending, Georgia lingered in the estate library. The fire burned low, casting amber light across the shelves. She was reviewing old contracts when she heard soft footsteps behind her. "Bethany." "Couldn't sleep?" Georgia asked without turning. "Could you?" Bethany's tone conveyed a peculiar blend of sympathy and challenge. Georgia faced her. "You play your role well. Lillian must be proud." Bethany's lips curved slightly. "You think I'm her puppet?" "Aren't you?" Bethany stepped closer, eyes gleaming with something dangerous and human all at once. "I'm waiting to see who deserves to win." Georgia studied her, the air between them taut as wire. "You enjoy walking the line between loyalty and betrayal." Bethany smiled faintly. "It's the only way to survive people like Lillian." Their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Two women trapped in a war orchestrated by men and mothers who believed they could control everything. "Careful," Georgia said softly. "You might care who gets hurt." Bethany's gaze flickered just for a moment. "Maybe I already do." Then she left, the scent of her perfume lingering like an unanswered question. That night, Iris called. "We've found something. The Simone inheritance structure goes deeper than we thought. There's an offshore entity, Orion Holdings, connected to every patent submission. Guess whose name is on the founding charter? Lillian's, Andrew's. But he backdated the documents 5 years, before your marriage even began." Georgia's heart tightened. "So he planned this before he even met me?" "Not precisely," Iris said carefully. "It looks like he met you because of it. There's a record from a private investor's dinner years ago. Lillian referred to you as a remarkable talent worth integrating." Georgia closed her eyes. Integrating. The word hit harder than any insult. She'd been a strategy, not a soulmate. Send me everything, she said. It's time I stop reacting and start building. Iris hesitated. You're sure you can handle it alone? I'm not alone, Georgia said. Not anymore. The next day, Georgia returned to the Simone offices under the guise of reviewing project updates. She carried herself like a woman trying to make peace. Andrew welcomed her with open arms, relieved by what he believed was surrender. He guided her through the conference hall, his hand resting lightly on her back. You've been distant, he said softly. I thought I'd lost you. You almost did, she replied, her voice steady but low. But I realized something our strength has always been in rebuilding. Andrew smiled, mistaking her meaning. That's my girl. The words stung, but Georgia returned the smile perfectly. Exactly. As they walked, she noticed an unfamiliar man watching her from across the hall. Sharp suit, calm eyes, posture that suggested military precision. When their gazes met, he nodded slightly. Later, Iris texted, That's Luca, corporate security chief. He's a former intelligence officer now, loyal to whoever pays him more. Don't underestimate him, Georgia replied. What if I don't have to pay him? Can I convince him? A week later, she got her chance. Luca found her in the courtyard after a board dinner. He approached quietly, holding out her forgotten shawl. You left this inside. Thank you, she said, taking it. You're new, aren't you? New enough, he said. But I do my research. I know who you are. Then you know I'm not supposed to be trusted. He smiled faintly. That depends on what you want. She looked at him carefully. What if I told you I wanted the truth? Luca's eyes met hers, steady, assessing. Truth costs more than loyalty in this family. I can pay in something better, Georgia said quietly. Freedom. The moment lingered, a subtle spark, both dangerous and magnetic. For the first time since her world collapsed, Georgia felt something stir beyond anger. It wasn't trust, not yet, but the faint pulse of possibility. Luca slipped a small card into her hand before walking away. When you're ready to trade secrets for survival, call me. That night, Georgia stood by her studio window, the city glowing beneath her. The rain had begun to fall, streaking the glass like liquid silver. She held the card between her fingers, thinking of all the dangerous alliances forming around her, Bethany's divided loyalty, Iris's legal war, Luca's unreadable promise. Each piece was moving, each one a potential weapon or a trap. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Iris. Careful, G. They're watching. Lillian requested an audit of your personal accounts. Georgia smiled faintly. Let her look, she whispered. The more she watches, the less she'll see. She turned back to her desk where blueprints lay spread out, not of buildings this time, but of strategies. Every betrayal, every lie, every secret alliance had its place. And in the center of it all stood her name, no longer erased. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Georgia whispered to herself, let the storm begin. The day the trap revealed itself, it didn't come with thunder or rage. It came quietly, like a whispered secret slipping through cracks in the walls of the Simone legacy. Georgia was in her studio's sunlight, cutting across the drafting table, when Iris's name flashed on her phone. You need to see this in person, Iris said, her voice tight. It's not just your designs they wanted. It's you. An hour later, Georgia was in Iris's downtown office, the sound of traffic muffled behind thick glass. Iris didn't waste time. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a copy of the Simone estate succession agreement, a confidential addendum attached to the family trust. At the top, in bold letters, Directive 12, Continuity of Bloodline and Asset Integration. Georgia frowned. Bloodline. Iris nodded grimly. It's not about inheritance. It's about control. This clause ensures that any intellectual property or estate asset created by a spouse remains within the Simone line, even in the event of divorce or death. Georgia read further, her eyes tracing the cold mechanical phrasing. The clause stated that if she died or were declared legally incompetent, her assets, including creative rights, would transfer directly to Andrew or their designated heir. Her stomach turned. Designated heir, Lillian Iris said quietly. She named herself. Temporarily, of course. Until Andrew produces an heir. Georgia stared at the page. The room seemed to tilt. So even my death would serve their legacy. Exactly, Iris said. They don't just steal ideas, they breed ownership. You're a vessel in their architecture. The words landed like cold iron. Georgia stood pacing to the window. The city stretched beyond, alive, untamed, free. Every skyscraper represents someone's vision. And yet hers had been reduced to a clause in someone else's inheritance plan. After a long silence, Iris spoke again. There's more. She opened a hidden folder on her computer and projected a document onto the wall. It was an internal memo dated months before Georgia's marriage. Subject: Strategic Marital Alignment. Candidate Georgia V. The memo described her as an asset of exceptional creative potential, whose alignment with Andrew Simone would secure intellectual continuity and stabilize the Simone brand for at least one generational cycle. Georgia whispered, "They profiled me like a business acquisition." Iris's expression hardened. "They orchestrated everything, how you met, how he courted you, even the timing of your projects." Georgia sank into the chair, her pulse pounding in her ears. The man she'd once loved hadn't chosen her for love. He'd selected her for efficiency. But before despair could settle, anger burned through it, clean, bright, and unstoppable. "They built a cage," she said, her voice cold. "Let's see how they handle the fire inside it." That evening, Georgia attended a Simone Foundation gala, her first public appearance since the confrontation at the boardroom. The grand ballroom shimmered with gold and mirrors, a perfect illusion of generosity and refinement. Andrew was there, smiling for the cameras, his hand resting on her back like a claim. Lillian presided nearby, radiating quiet dominance. Georgia smiled for the photographers, her lips painted in composure. She'd learned that survival required performance. Bethany appeared at her side, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You're glowing," she murmured. "I've learned to smile with precision," Georgia replied. Bethany clinked her glass softly. "Then keep smiling. Lillian's watching." Across the room, Lillian's gaze lingered sharp as a hawk's. Georgia met it calmly, letting her eyes convey something Lillian didn't expect: amusement. The older woman's lips tightened. Moments later, Andrew leaned close. "You look radiant tonight." "Do I?" Georgia said lightly. "Radiance often hides cracks in the marble." He chuckled, oblivious. "I missed your metaphors." She turned to him, her voice silk over steel. "You never understood them." Before he could reply, a new voice joined the conversation, smooth, deep, and unexpectedly familiar. "Mr. Simone, I believe your security staff is requesting that you come to the entrance." Andrew looked up. Luca stood nearby, expression neutral, eyes glinting with quiet awareness. Andrew excused himself, leaving Georgia and Luca alone by the balcony. She exhaled, tension easing. "You're good at distractions." Luca smiled faintly. "It's what I'm paid for." "Still loyal to them?" she asked. "I'm loyal to the truth," he said. "And lately the truth doesn't seem to live under the Simone roof." Georgia studied him. "Why tell me that?" "Because," he said, stepping closer, "I think you're planning something dangerous. And I want in." Her breath caught. You're offering to betray your employer. He shrugged slightly. Loyalty isn't about who signs the paycheck. It's about who deserves it. For a moment, the noise of the gala faded. The air between them hummed with quiet electricity. His proximity was disarming, the kind of closeness that made her heart beat a little too fast. Careful, she said softly. You don't know what you're asking for. I know exactly what I'm asking for, he replied, a chance to even the scales. She held his gaze, searching for deception, and found none. Instead, she saw something unexpected: empathy. Not pity, not manipulation, genuine human empathy. Before she could respond, Lillian appeared beside them, her smile as elegant as ever. Georgia, dear, she said sweetly, may I borrow you for a moment? Georgia turned, masking her unease. Of course. Lillian guided her toward a quiet corner. You've been distant lately. I hope the past few weeks haven't clouded your judgment. This family thrives on unity. Unity, Georgia repeated. Interesting word. Do you mean loyalty or silence? Lillian's eyes gleamed. Both. You're intelligent enough to know that rebellion never ends well for those who forget their place. Georgia smiled faintly. Then it's time you remembered mine. Lillian's mask didn't slip, but her tone chilled. Be very careful, my dear. You may think you've learned our game, but you were never meant to win it. Then you should have chosen a less dangerous opponent, Georgia murmured. Their eyes locked, two predators behind polite smiles. Later that night, as Georgia left the gala, Luca appeared beside her car. I took the liberty of escorting you, he said. I didn't ask for protection. He smirked. No, but you need it. Lillian just called Carrington. There's talk of freezing your personal accounts. Georgia sighed. Then she's more predictable than I thought. Predictable doesn't mean harmless, Luca said. You're walking a thin line, Georgia. You're outnumbered. Outfinanced, but not outsmarted, she finished. Their eyes met again, and this time she didn't look away. You said you wanted to level the playing field. Are you ready to prove it? Luca hesitated. How? By giving me everything you know about the Simone Trust. Every security file, every offshore account, every unreported transaction. I'll build something they can't bury. He studied her, then nodded slowly. You'll have it. But understand, once you cross this line, there's no turning back. Georgia smiled faintly. I burned that bridge the moment I married him. When she returned home, the estate was quiet. She walked through the halls, memories whispering around her, laughter, blueprints, promises. She stopped by the portrait of the Simone ancestors. Their painted eyes watched her like ghosts. She whispered to them, You built your legacy on lies. I'll rewrite it in truth. Then she turned away, her reflection caught in the glass, a woman no longer trapped in someone else's inheritance. But as she reached her studio, her phone buzzed a message. From Andrew. We need to talk. I know what you're doing. Georgia's smile didn't falter. She typed back one sentence. Then you finally understand what it feels like to be watched. The game had entered its next phase, one, where every alliance could save her or destroy her. And for the first time, Georgia was ready to gamble everything. Rain whispered against the windows of Georgia's studio, soft but relentless, like a reminder that storms could sound gentle before they tore the world apart. The clock read 2:00 a.m. She hadn't slept. Her desk was a battlefield of blueprints, court documents, and encrypted flash drives. The air carried the faint scent of graphite and coffee, her weapons of war. Iris's voice crackled through the encrypted line. Everything's in place, she said. The Copenhagen Symposium opens in 3 days. You'll have 1 hour on stage before Andrew presents. The board expects his keynote on the Simone method. Georgia looked at the glowing screen in front of her. Then we'll give them the truth instead. Just be aware, Iris continued. If you do this publicly, there's no going back. You'll expose him, his mother, and the entire empire. You'll also expose yourself. I'm done hiding, Georgia said. They built their world on my silence. I'm taking the sound back. Iris paused, then sighed softly. Then let's make it unforgettable. 2 nights later, Georgia boarded the private jet provided by the foundation. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same people who had stolen her dreams were now funding her flight to reclaim them. As she settled into her seat, she noticed Luca across the aisle. Dressed in black, calm, unreadable. His presence both unnerved and grounded her. You didn't have to come, she said quietly. Yes, I did, he replied. You're walking into a lion's den. Someone has to ensure the lions don't bite too soon. She smirked. You sound like you almost care. Almost, he said, but his eyes lingered on her longer than professional courtesy allowed. They didn't speak for the rest of the flight, but the silence between them was charged like electricity humming before lightning strikes. Copenhagen greeted them with a silver dawn. The symposium venue loomed like a cathedral of glass banners fluttering in the wind. Innovation through legacy. Georgia looked up at the words and whispered, Legacy is just theft with better marketing. Inside the event buzzed with elegance. Architects, investors, and critics in tailored suits, champagne in hand. Cameras followed Andrew as he worked the crowd, Lillian close by, regal and composed. Bethany was there too, standing beside the main stage, her posture immaculate, but her eyes darting restless. When she saw Georgia, her expression flickered. Surprise, then fear, then something softer. You shouldn't be here, Bethany murmured when they crossed paths. I could say the same, Georgia replied. Bethany's voice dropped. Lillian has people watching you. If you go through with this, then I'll finally stop being their project, Georgia said. Tell her I said hello. Bethany hesitated, then leaned closer. For what it's worth, I never wanted it to end like this. It hasn't ended yet, Georgia said. It's just starting. Backstage, Luca was setting up her presentation. Every slide, every file was locked with a custom code. He moved with the precision of a soldier, his focus absolute. Security's tight, he said, but I've rerouted their internal feed. When you start speaking, the broadcast will switch from Andrew's scheduled deck to yours. Georgia nodded, adjusting the earpiece. And Andrew. In his suite, Luca said. Lillian is briefing him on optics. They think you're in London. She smiled faintly. Let's not ruin their surprise too soon. As Luca handed her a small flash drive, their fingers brushed. It was an accident, but the contact lingered a spark of warmth against the morning chill. Be careful, he said. If they sense what you're doing before you're done, they won't go quietly. I don't expect them to, she said. I expect them to lose. When Georgia stepped onto the stage, the world seemed to slow. The lights flared. The audience hushed. The moderator announced, representing the Simone Foundation's groundbreaking architectural innovation, Mrs. Georgia Simone. Applause followed, polite and uncertain. She could see Andrew and Lillian entering the hall, just as the first slide appeared. It wasn't the Simone logo. It was a photograph. Her photograph. Standing in front of her first restoration project, smiling proud, free. Good morning, she began, her voice calm, clear. I was asked to speak about legacy, but legacies, as you all know, can be lies built in marble. A ripple went through the audience. Andrew's face hardened. Lillian's hand froze mid-motion. Georgia continued each word, precise, deliberate. For years, I worked under a name that was not my own. My designs, my research, my patents filed under the Simone Foundation. I was told it was for unity, for the family, for love, But unity built on deception is just slavery with better lighting. The following slide appeared blueprints of her sustainable plaster technology. Then legal documents, patents, bank transfers, dates, signatures. Gasps filled the room. Andrew rose to his feet. "This is a private matter," he shouted. Georgia didn't stop. "No, Andrew. This is a public theft. You didn't just take my work. You took years of other people's lives, the ones buried under your so-called family trust." She turned to the crowd. "They call it inheritance. I call it extraction. Every creative mind they integrated was consumed and replaced." Security guards moved toward the stage. Luca intercepted, speaking quietly into his mic. Within seconds, the hall's lights dimmed, and every screen displayed her evidence. The world was watching. Georgia looked directly at the cameras. "To every architect, artist, and innovator who's been told your gift belongs to someone else, this is for you." She concluded her speech with a final image, the Simone Estate Trust Agreement bearing Lillian's signature. Then she said the words that would echo across continents. "You can't build anything real on stolen ground." The audience erupted in shock, outrage, and applause. Reporters swarmed forward. Andrew's face drained of color. Lillian's composure cracked her expression, twisting into fury. Bethany slipped quietly out of the hall, her phone in hand, eyes gleaming with conflicted triumph. Luca approached Georgia as the chaos unfolded. "You just declared war on an empire." Georgia exhaled, steady. "Good. I designed the battlefield." That night in her hotel suite, overlooking the city, Georgia stood by the window. The glow from the symposium still flickered below headlines already spreading across the world. There was a knock. She opened the door to find Luca. He looked exhausted, rain-soaked, but alive. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she corrected. He stepped closer. "They'll retaliate. Hard." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I need you." Their eyes locked, tension sharp, electric. The distance between them dissolved as the storm outside raged. "I told you," Luca whispered, his voice low. "I'm not loyal to them." "I know," Georgia said, her tone barely above a breath. "That's why I'm scared of you." He smiled faintly. "Then we're finally even." When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle. It was raw, defiant, a collision of two people who had nothing left to lose. And for the first time in a long time, Georgia didn't feel taken advantage of. She felt alive. The morning after Copenhagen was the kind of silence that comes only after explosions. The city was awake, but the world was holding its breath. Every headline carried her name. Architect exposes Simone Empire at Global Symposium. Marriage built on theft. Georgia Fife breaks her silence. Georgia stood before the hotel window, phone buzzing nonstop. Emails, calls, legal threats. Her life had become a battlefield of screens. She ignored them all. The truth was out. The storm had finally broken. Behind her, Luca leaned against the wall. Sleeves rolled up, eyes scanning the news feeds. "You've started a revolution," he said quietly. "Half the industry is hailing you as a hero. The other half is terrified of you." She smiled faintly. "Good. Fear is cleaner than pity." But even as she spoke, exhaustion pulled at her bones. The high of victory was already fading, replaced by the low hum of danger. She knew Lillian wouldn't sit still. Power like hers didn't crumble, it recalculated. Luca stepped closer. "We need to move fast." Lillian's lawyers filed injunctions overnight. She's freezing accounts, suppressing coverage, and trying to rewrite the story before it spreads further. "Then we make it spread faster," Georgia said. "Iris is already coordinating that," Luca replied. "But there's more. Andrew's missing." She turned sharply. What do you mean, missing? He vanished after the conference. His flight was canceled. His phone went dark. My contacts in security say he's off the grid. That's not retreat, it's strategy. Georgia crossed her arms, her pulse quickening. He's planning something. Yes, Luca said. And when men like him disappear, they don't come back with flowers. That afternoon, Georgia and Iris met at a small cafe hidden in an alley. One of those places where conversations disappeared under the sound of rain and espresso machines. Iris slid a folder across the table. Here's what we know. Lillian called an emergency board meeting this morning. She's trying to remove Andrew as CEO to protect the brand image. She's painting you as the manipulator. Georgia raised an eyebrow. The woman who created the trust that enslaved me is now claiming I controlled her son. That's impressive even for her. She's also making moves legally, Iris said. They're arguing that the intellectual property leak constitutes corporate sabotage. They'll accuse you of industrial espionage. Let them try, Georgia said. Every document I revealed belongs to me. That's not how they'll spin it, Iris warned. They'll drown you in litigation. Lillian's goal isn't to win, it's to exhaust you. Georgia took a slow sip of her coffee. Then we'll fight differently. Not in court, in public. Iris smiled faintly. You sound like a woman who's learned to weaponize her own narrative. Maybe I finally have. Back at the hotel, Luca was waiting. He'd set up a temporary command center laptops, encrypted lines, news feeds from around the world. The quiet efficiency of his movements fascinated her. Every gesture was deliberate, protective. You've got supporters, he said, independent media outlets, creative unions, and even whistleblower groups. But there's one problem. What? He turned the screen toward her. It was a headline from a financial outlet. Simone family accuses Georgia Fove of manipulating security official to leak corporate data. Her blood ran cold. They're targeting you. Luca's tone stayed calm. They need a scapegoat, and I'm convenient. A former intelligence officer with a shadowy past is already under scrutiny. They'll say you seduced me into betraying my employer. Georgia's voice hardened. They're not just destroying reputations anymore. They're manufacturing enemies. He stepped closer, his voice low. They underestimate you. They think you'll crumble under guilt. She looked up at him. And you? What do you think I'll do? I think you'll burn their empire to the ground, he said. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them hummed with the quiet ache of tension and something dangerously close to tenderness. Luca, she said softly, if you stay, they'll destroy you too. He smiled faintly. I've been destroyed before. You're the first reason I've had to rebuild. Her breath caught. She wanted to tell him that this wasn't the time, that revenge and love shouldn't coexist. But his eyes, steady loyal, made her realize they already did. 2 days later, chaos exploded. A leaked video surfaced online, showing Andrew Simone standing before a small group of investors ranting about Georgia's betrayal. His words were venomous. She was never my equal, he shouted in the clip. She was a project. My mother was right. Some women mistake gratitude for genius. The clip went viral within hours. Iris called immediately. They leaked this themselves. It's bait to make you respond emotionally. But Georgia didn't rage. She didn't cry. She smiled. Perfect, she said. Let them underestimate me again. That evening, she recorded her own video, a quiet 3-minute statement. No shouting, no dramatics. Just truth. I was called a project. Maybe I was. But projects can outgrow their architects. Legacies built on lies collapse eventually, and this one already has. I won't fight for revenge. I'll fight for creation, for every voice they tried to silence. By morning, her words had reached millions. Artists, writers, and architects began sharing her message with the hashtag #BuildYourOwnName. Lillian's empire began to fracture not from lawsuits, but from a loss of public trust. Yet even as victory approached, danger crept closer. Late one night, Georgia returned to her suite and found the door slightly ajar. The air inside felt wrong, too still. She stepped carefully inside, her instincts on alert. Then she saw it. Her laptop gone. The encrypted drives gone. A single envelope lay on the desk. No name, no seal. Just one line written in neat, cold handwriting. The foundation always wins. Her pulse spiked. She grabbed her phone and called Luca. No answer. Then Iris. Straight to voicemail. The city lights outside blurred as panic edged into her calm. She scanned the room again. Nothing disturbed, except one thing: the photograph of her and Andrew from their wedding, left face down on the floor. It was deliberate, a message. Moments later, her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You thought you could expose us and walk away. Come home, Georgia. We're waiting." Her hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. She whispered into the empty room, "Not this time." Hours later, she sat in a car racing through the city, Luca driving. He'd found her before dawn, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "They've taken everything," she said. "Not everything," he replied. "We backed up your evidence on a hidden server. Iris still has the access codes, but they're escalating. This isn't legal warfare anymore. It's personal." "Good," Georgia said. "So is my revenge." He looked at her, half in admiration, half in warning. "You're walking a thin line between justice and destruction." She met his gaze. "You can't rebuild until you've torn down what was rotten." Outside, the horizon was bleeding light. The war wasn't over. It was only transforming. And in that fleeting sunrise, Georgia realized something powerful. She was no longer fighting for retribution. She was fighting for rebirth. But the Simones weren't done either. And as the first call from Lillian's private number appeared on her phone, Georgia smiled coldly and answered, "Hello, Lillian. Let's finish what you started." The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden bars across the rows of spectators and reporters. The world had been waiting for this moment. Georgia versus the Simone estate. The trial that would decide the fate of an empire built on deception. Georgia sat beside Iris, calm on the outside, but pulsing with quiet electricity. Across the aisle, Lillian and Andrew sat flanked by a fleet of lawyers, their expressions carved from arrogance and fear. Bethany was nowhere to be seen. Luca sat behind Georgia, silent, protective, his eyes never leaving her. The judge entered, and the whispers died instantly. Iris leaned close. "They're going to start with character assassination. Don't react." Georgia nodded once. "Let them try." The opposing counsel rose, a sleek man with the confidence of someone who'd buried countless reputations. "Your Honor, I would like to begin by stating that my clients Lillian and Andrew Simone have suffered immeasurable harm due to the defendant's malicious actions. What Mrs. Simone calls truth is in fact calculated sabotage, an emotional vendetta disguised as justice." He turned to the jury. "She violated confidentiality agreements, breached fiduciary trust, and conspired with corporate insiders to leak private data. This wasn't courage. It was revenge." He paused for effect, then smiled. "And we will prove that she was not the victim, but the architect of deceit." Lillian's gaze flicked toward Georgia, triumphant. Andrew smirked, fingers drumming on the table. Iris stood, her tone precise and cool. "Defense will show that Mrs. Georgia Simone was not the architect of deceit, but its first victim. We will present documented proof that her intellectual property was stolen, her marriage was orchestrated for financial gain, and her name was erased to sustain a fraudulent empire. The first piece of evidence flashed on the screen, a copy of the Strategic Marital Alignment Memo. The courtroom gasped. The prosecutor objected immediately, but the judge allowed it. Overruled. Proceed. Iris continued, her voice like silk over steel. This document was written a month before Mrs. Simone's wedding. It details a plan to absorb her creative assets into the Simone Trust. Not only that, it refers to her as a target candidate. Lillian's mask cracked for half a second. Andrew shifted uncomfortably. Georgia didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead, every muscle held in quiet control. Then Iris called her to the stand. Georgia walked with the grace of someone who had stopped fearing judgment long ago. The murmurs rose as she took the oath and faced the room. Mrs. Simone, Iris began, when you created the sustainable plaster technology known as the Simone method. Who originally owned it? I did. Georgia replied clearly. I developed it independently before the foundation ever existed. And when did the Simone Trust claim ownership? The day after my wedding, Georgia said. Andrew filed the patent transfer under the guise of marital consolidation. I was told it was symbolic. And did you consent to that transfer? I consented to love, she said softly, not theft. A ripple went through the courtroom. Even the judge looked up. Iris continued, guiding her carefully. When you discovered this deception, what did you do? I tried to reason with them. I was met with silence. When I uncovered that dozens of others had been exploited the same way, I decided the truth needed light, not lawyers. The prosecutor rose sharply. Mrs. Simone, isn't it fascinating that you shared confidential data with an outside party? Mr. Luca Varan, a known former intelligence operative. Luca's name hit the air like a spark. Reporters leaned forward. Georgia met the lawyer's gaze. Yes, I did, because unlike my husband, Luca never lied about what he wanted. A few people in the back gasped. Lillian's eyes narrowed. Andrew's jaw clenched. The prosecutor smirked. So by your own admission, you compromised classified corporate data for personal reasons. Georgia smiled faintly. No. I revealed public lies for moral ones. The difference is integrity. The judge tapped the gavel once. Counsel, keep the questioning relevant. The prosecutor hesitated, regrouping. Mrs. Simone, do you love Mr. Varan? The question landed heavily. The courtroom went silent. Georgia's eyes flicked toward Luca, who sat motionless in the back row. Then she looked back at the lawyer and said calmly, I love the truth he stood for. The rest is none of your business. Even the jury seemed to breathe differently after that. During the recess, the corridor outside the courtroom buzzed with voices. Iris was reviewing documents. Luca approached Georgia quietly. You handled that perfectly, he said. Did I? She asked. Because now they'll come for you. They already have, he said. Interpol froze one of my accounts this morning. Lillian's fingerprints are all over it. Georgia's eyes softened. You could still walk away. And leave you in the crossfire. Luca smiled faintly. That's not who I am. For a brief, fragile moment, the tension broke. The chaos around them faded, and it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Whatever happens, Georgia whispered, you made me believe in something again. He touched her hand briefly. Then it was worth it. Back inside, Iris called her next witness, Bethany Crane. The room stirred. Cameras flashed as Bethany entered, composed but tense. Iris began. Ms. Crane, you were employed by the Simone Foundation as a senior consultant, correct? Yes. And during that time, did you witness any internal discussions regarding Mrs. Simone's intellectual property? Bethany hesitated. Lillian's glare could have frozen steel. Yes, Bethany said, Finally, her voice trembling but steady. I was part of them. A ripple went through the room. Iris stepped closer. Please elaborate. Bethany took a deep breath. Lillian instructed me to replicate Mrs. Simone's designs and present them as institutional projects. Andrew agreed. They said if Georgia ever objected, they'd claim she'd signed everything away. Lillian slammed her hand on the table. Lies. The judge banged the gavel. Order. Bethany continued louder now, tears glinting. I helped them steal her work. I thought it was survival. But she was the only honest person in the room. Georgia felt something twist inside her. Not anger, but pity. The prosecutor scrambled to recover, but the damage was irreversible. Iris introduced the final piece of evidence, a series of audio recordings from the night Georgia discovered the betrayal. Andrew's voice filled the speakers, cruel and unguarded. She's too idealistic. That's why she'll never see it coming. Gasps filled the chamber. Andrew's face drained of color. Lillian turned away. When the judge finally adjourned for the day, the courtroom was in uproar. Outside reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing like lightning. But Georgia didn't stop. She walked out with Iris and Luca beside her, the cold air sharp and liberating. Tomorrow, Iris said quietly, the verdict comes. Georgia nodded. Whatever it is, they've already lost. Luca looked at her, his voice low. What will you do after this? She smiled faintly. Rebuild, but not for them. For everyone they tried to break. And as she stepped into the waiting car, she realized something profound. The Empire wasn't her enemy anymore. The silence was, and she just taught the world how to shatter it. The final day of the trial began under a gray sky. A thin drizzle coated the courthouse steps, soft as whispers, yet charged with expectation. Crowds gathered outside, journalists, protesters, architects, and curious strangers, each person waiting for a verdict that had grown larger than the case itself. Georgia arrived quietly, escorted by Luca and Iris. Cameras flashed, voices shouted questions, but she didn't break stride. Her black coat fluttered in the wind, a silhouette of calm against chaos. Inside the courtroom buzzed with tension. Lillian sat poised, every inch the matriarch who refused to bow. Andrew beside her looked pale, worn, and restless. Across the aisle, Georgia took her seat, her hands steady on the table. Iris leaned close. They've pushed hard for a mistrial overnight, making last-minute motions and creating procedural noise. But the judge denied them. We're walking into a decision. Georgia nodded her gaze, never leaving Lillian. Then let's end it. The judge entered. Everyone rose. After reviewing all evidence, testimonies, and supporting documents, the court finds that the Simone Foundation engaged in systematic misappropriation of intellectual property under the pretense of marital and corporate integration. The words fell heavy, final. Andrew's head dropped. Lillian's jaw tightened, but her expression didn't break. The judge continued. Furthermore, the evidence demonstrates coercive manipulation in the formation of the Simone Trust, rendering its clauses invalid. Effective immediately, all proprietary claims tied to the defendant's intellectual work are void. Ownership returns to its rightful creator, Mrs. Georgia Simone. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scrambled for notes. Georgia didn't smile. Not yet. The judge's voice hardened. However, given the magnitude of public exposure and the harm to investors, Mrs. Simone will assume partial stewardship of the foundation for a transitional period overseen by an independent ethics board. The era of the Simone monopoly comes to an end today. And with the final gavel strike, the empire shattered. Outside the courthouse, the world erupted. Applause, shouting, cameras flashing like thunder. Georgia stood at the top of the marble steps, the cold air slicing through her lungs like the first breath of freedom. Iris stood beside her, exhaustion and triumph mingling in her eyes. "You did it," Iris said softly. "No," Georgia replied. "We did it. And it's not over." Reporters swarmed, shouting questions. "Georgia, will you take over the company? Do you forgive your husband? What happens to Lily and Simone now?" Georgia paused, her gaze distant. "What happens to them," she said, "depends on how much truth they can survive." That night, the storm came. Georgia stood alone in the Simone estate library, the same room where she'd once watched her husband and his mother conspire under the chandelier's light. The fire burned low. The air smelled of paper smoke and endings. Footsteps echoed. Still playing Queen of Ashes. Lillian's voice was calm, but beneath it, steel trembled. Georgia turned slowly. "You should have stayed away. And miss watching you drown in your own idealism?" Lillian stepped closer. Elegance undiminished, even in defeat. "You think you've won? You think the world will let a woman like you rule what you exposed?" Georgia tilted her head. "They'll let me because they saw the truth. That's something you never trusted." Lillian's eyes glimmered with contempt and something like sorrow. "Truth is just another kind of weapon, my dear. You've learned to wield it, but it'll cut you too." "You built your life on fear," Georgia said softly. "I'll make mine on freedom." For the first time, Lillian's composure cracked. "Freedom is an illusion for women like us," she whispered. "We win only by control." Georgia's reply was quiet, but it struck like lightning. "Then it's time for someone to change the rules." They stared at each other, two women bound by brilliance and betrayal, until Lillian turned and walked away, her heels echoing like fading thunder. Hours later, Andrew appeared. He looked nothing like the man who once ruled rooms with charm. His tie was loose, his voice rough. "You destroyed everything," he said. "No," Georgia replied. "I uncovered what was already rotten." He stepped closer, desperation bleeding through his anger. "Do you really think you're better than me? You used me too. You loved the idea of saving me." "I loved the man I thought you were," she said quietly. "And that's the difference. You pretended. I believed." He laughed bitterly. "And what now? You and your new guard dog rebuild the empire. You'll be just like me." She looked at him long, steady. "No. I'll be the first Simone who doesn't lie to survive." Andrew's shoulders sagged. "You're going to regret this." Georgia's tone was gentle, almost pitying. "I already have." He turned and left without another word. Later that night, Georgia found herself in the garden under a canopy of rain. The air was cold, her breath visible. She'd walked through every corridor, every memory, and found that the ghosts no longer frightened her. Luca appeared behind her, umbrella in hand. "You shouldn't be out here." "Neither should you," she said. He smiled faintly. "You never listen." They stood in silence, the rain whispering around them. For the first time in months, she felt the world quiet enough to breathe. "It's over," Luca said softly. She turned toward him, rain glinting in her hair. "Nothing this big ends cleanly. Then, what now?" She hesitated. "I rebuild. But differently this time. No contracts. No cages. Just creation." He studied her. "And me." Georgia looked up at him, eyes searching. "You saved me when you didn't have to. You stayed when it was dangerous. But I don't want you to stay because of loyalty. Stay if it's love." Luca's expression softened. It was never loyalty. He closed the distance between them. His hand brushed hers, tentative, asking permission. She didn't pull away. When he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate fire of survival. It was something quieter, steadier, like finally stepping out of the storm. And for the first time, Georgia allowed herself to feel peace. The following morning, She walked through the empty boardroom of the Simone Foundation, her name now etched on the glass door. Reporters would soon swarm. Meetings would begin. But for now, she allowed herself one moment of stillness. She ran her hand over the long conference table, the same one where lies were once drafted into law. Then she opened her folder and placed a single document in the center, the Reconstruction Charter. At the top, her signature. Below it, the Simone Foundation will be restructured as the Veran Institute for Ethical Design, dedicated to protecting creative ownership and empowering independent architects. She looked out the window. The city shimmered under the morning sun, alive, defiant. Iris entered quietly. "You're really doing it." "Yes," Georgia said, "and this time no one gets erased." Iris smiled. "The world's already calling you a visionary." Georgia laughed softly. "They called Lillian that once too. Let's earn the title differently." As the day ended, Georgia stood once more in her studio, the place where everything had begun. The scent of paper and ink surrounded her, familiar and grounding. Her phone buzzed a message from Luca. "Dinner tonight. No boardrooms, no plans, just us." She smiled. For once, the future didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a blank page. Georgia looked at her reflection in the window. Strong, calm, unbroken. She whispered, "The foundation fell, but I didn't." Then she turned off the lights, closing the door on the past, and stepping fully into her new beginning. The city glittered beneath the dusk like a sea of moving constellations. From the balcony of her new headquarters, the Veran Institute for Ethical Design, Georgia, watched the skyline pulse with life. The building below her hummed with activity. Engineers, artists, architects, all working toward the same purpose she had once fought alone. It had been 6 months since the trial. The world had changed. So had she. The foundation that once bore her husband's name was gone, replaced by something honest, something living. Every blueprint and innovation created under her leadership now bore the names of its actual creators, no hidden clauses, no manipulation. Still, peace was a fragile thing. As she stared into the horizon, Iris entered the terrace holding 2 glasses of wine. "You did it," she said softly. "The world said it couldn't be done." Georgia took a glass, smiling faintly. "The world says that until someone proves it wrong." Iris studied her. "And yet you look like a woman waiting for the next storm." "Peace never lasts," Georgia said. "Not when people like Lillian still breathe ambition." Iris's expression darkened. "You think she's coming back?" "She's too proud to disappear quietly," Georgia replied. "And Andrew? I haven't seen or heard from him since the verdict was announced. That kind of silence usually hides a plan." "Then we stay ready," Iris said, raising her glass to the builders who outlived their ruins. Georgia clinked her glass lightly, ready to build cages again. 2 weeks later, the first crack appeared. A private investor meeting was interrupted when a journalist revealed a leaked memo, an accusation that the Veran Institute was secretly funded by offshore accounts once owned by the Simone family. The press erupted. Headlines screamed of hypocrisy. The empire Georgia had fought to cleanse was being portrayed as a new source of corruption. That evening, she met Luca in her office, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls like fractured mirrors. "They're planting evidence," he said. "I've traced the leak, it's coordinated. Someone wants to taint your name before the Institute expands into Europe." Lillian, Georgia said flatly. "Or Andrew," Luca countered. "He's the ghost in this war. He's gone off the radar, but his fingerprints are everywhere. Shell companies, backdoor deals. He's building something again." Georgia exhaled slowly. "Then he's about to learn, I can build faster." Luca's eyes softened. "You can't fight forever, Georgia," maybe she said, turning toward the skyline. but I can finish what they started." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Just promise me you won't destroy yourself in the process." She met his gaze. "I've already been destroyed once. Now I'm designing the rebuild." Their eyes lingered a heartbeat too long, too real. Then Georgia turned away, the conversation unfinished, but heavy with something neither dared name. The next morning, Bethany walked into Georgia's office without being announced. Her appearance was different, sharper, colder, a woman who'd learned to play her own dangerous game. "I heard about the leak," she said smoothly. "You should know, not everyone in your camp is loyal." Georgia studied her. "And why should I trust you?" "Because," Bethany said, placing a folder on the desk, "Lillian reached out to me yesterday. She's regrouping. She wants to reclaim the foundation name, and she's planning a merger with an international consortium. If she succeeds, she'll erase everything you've done." Georgia opened the folder. Inside were emails, financial trails, names, proof of Lillian's quiet resurrection. "You could have sold this information," Georgia said. Bethany smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm tired of selling my soul." Georgia's tone softened. "Then you're welcome here. But understand this time there are no shadows to hide in." Bethany's smirk faded into something almost vulnerable. "Then I'll learn to stand in the light." That night, the trap was set. Georgia, Iris, Luca, and Bethany gathered in the Institute's private conference room, the air thick with anticipation. "We've traced Lillian's operation to Zurich," Iris said. "She's using a front called Orion Holdings, the same one Andrew used before the trial. They've arranged a private gala next week to announce a legacy restoration project. That's their move." Georgia nodded slowly. "Then we'll make it ours." Luca leaned forward. "You're walking into a room full of predators. If you confront them publicly again, they won't just fight back with words. They will also resort to physical violence." Georgia's voice was calm. "Good. I've never been afraid of predators. They forget that architects design cages too." The gala in Zurich was opulent, the kind of wealth that tried too hard to look eternal. Chandeliers glittered above masked guests. Georgia entered in a silver gown, composed and unreadable. Across the room, Lillian stood near the center, radiant in her defiance. Andrew was beside her, older, thinner, but still dangerous. When he saw Georgia, he froze. For a brief second, old memories flickered behind his eyes. Love, betrayal, recognition. Then they vanished, replaced by calculation. Lillian greeted her with a smile that could cut glass. "My dear Georgia, I see you've learned presentation from the best." "I learned what not to be," Georgia replied coolly. "And you taught me well." Their words were daggers wrapped in silk. As the speeches began, Georgia gave Luca the signal. Within seconds, the lights dimmed and the main screen flickered. Instead of Lillian's grand presentation, files began to appear. Emails, contracts, and bank transfers, proof of continued fraud under Orion Holdings. Gasps filled the hall. Cameras turned. Lillian's poise was shattered. "You think this will save you?" she hissed. Georgia met her gaze. "No, it will end you." Andrew stepped forward, fury rising. "You'll destroy us all." Georgia's reply was quiet, almost kind. "That's the point." Security swarmed. Chaos erupted. But Georgia and her team slipped away through the side exit, the sound of shouting fading behind them. Outside, under the cold Swiss night, Luca caught her hand. "You did it again." "No," she said softly. "This time we did." Weeks later, the headlines were clear. Lillian Simone indicted in international fraud scandal. Andrew Simone exiled from corporate governance. Varan Institute expands globally with transparency initiative. The world had finally shifted for good. In the quiet of her office, Georgia stood by the window once more. Luca entered behind her, his voice low. "It's over, Georgia. The foundation is gone. You've won." She smiled faintly. "It's not about winning. It's about building something that can't be stolen again." He stepped closer, gently touching her shoulder. "And you've built me too." She turned to face him. "You stayed through every storm. It may be time to learn what peace feels like." He smiled, pulling her closer. "Then let's design it together." As the city lights flickered outside, their reflection merged in the glass. Two survivors, architects of their own freedom. Georgia whispered almost to herself, "This is the only empire worth keeping." Epilogue. Months later, a plaque was unveiled at the Institute's entrance. To every voice once silenced, to every creator once erased, may truth always outbuild deception. The crowd applauded. Georgia smiled as Iris, Bethany, and Luca stood beside her. For the first time in years, she felt the peace she had fought for, not perfection, but possibility. And if you, dear listener, have followed Georgia's story from beginning to end, through betrayal, courage, and rebirth, take a moment to reflect. If her journey moved you, inspired you, or made you believe that truth and strength still matter, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories where resilience meets destiny. Because sometimes, rebuilding isn't the end. It's only the beginning.